Thank you for joining. Our webinar will start in just about a minute. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining our XBRL US webinar today, a conversation with the Securities and Exchange Commission. My name is Michelle Savage, and I'm here to introduce you to the program today. First, a couple of logistical points. I just want to mention that everyone on the call has been muted, with the exception of the panelists, of course. We are offering CPE credit for this program, and so at 2 points during the session, we'll be stopping to take a couple of CPE questions. If you are getting CPE credit, please make sure that you respond to those questions by clicking on the radio buttons that you see online. And then you'll be getting your certificate about 1 to 2 weeks after the program takes place. As we go through the program, we will be taking questions, and you can submit those questions by clicking on the Q&A link at the top of the screen. Just key in your question, and we'll take those during the program. So we're really happy to have with us today a couple of great speakers. We have Howard Kaplan. Howard is an IT specialist in the Center for Risk and Quantitative Analysis, the Division of Enforcement at the Securities and Exchange Commission. Howard has been with the SEC since 2008. And in his role in the Division of Enforcement, he investigates potential violations of the federal securities laws through data collection and integration. He conducts quantitative and qualitative analysis. He performs data modeling and interprets the results. Before joining the SEC, Howard spent time at Wolters Kluwer and also at McKinsey & Company. And moderating our session today, we have Chris Taylor. Chris is founder and CEO of P3 Data Systems. Chris has worked with US GAAP reporting for 30 years, and he has worked on XBRL since its inception back in 2009. He's a CPA and also an MBA. He founded P3 Data Systems in 2011 to focus on digital business reporting. P3 partners with many independent software vendors to deliver integrated solutions to end users efficiently and effectively. So we're very happy to have the two of our speakers today. And I'm going to actually just turn it over to Chris now, who's going to lead us into our questions.
Thank you, Michelle. And Howard, thanks for joining us today as well. I would like to start this conversation with kind of an overview of what exactly does the Division of Enforcement do?
Hi, Chris, and thank you for inviting me. Before I start, I just need to let everyone know that the SEC disclaims any responsibility for any private publication or statement that I make, and these comments are entirely mine and don't necessarily reflect those of the Commission, the Commissioners, or any members of the staff. So what you're hearing is just me. With respect to what we do and what I do, as Michelle said, the Division of Enforcement conducts investigations into possible violations. We prosecute cases, both in federal courts as well as in administrative proceeding courts. We have about 1,400 people in enforcement, both in DC and spread throughout 11 regional offices throughout the country. We have investigative teams as well as specialized units that look into particular types of, specialize in certain kinds of registrants or violations, such as market abuse or asset management. The group that I'm in is a small group. There are about 10 of us, and we've been around for about 3 years. There are quantitative analysts throughout the Division of Enforcement. Our group is sort of a place where any and all investigative teams can come for support with data analysis, and so we work on a wide variety of cases and with teams all across the country and on all kinds of work.
And Howard, in that role and your team, are you centrally located then, and then you support all field offices, or is your team dispersed as well?
Our team is also dispersed. The majority of the people are in DC, but we have people in regional offices as well, and the majority of our work is, in fact, with teams that are outside of the DC office.
Excellent. So when you're analyzing companies, what type of metrics do you consider?
So I guess to answer that question, I would first say that at least in my work, there's basically two approaches that we take. There's, where I'm being engaged by an investigative team to look at specific entities or events or filings and see whether or not there is data that supports an allegation of wrongdoing. And so, that'll be a very different kind of work than doing something that's more data-driven, where we're looking across a population to understand its profile and to figure out whether or not there is behavior in there that might constitute a violation. So depending on the kind of work we're doing, we will use, we'll go from the macro to the micro or micro to macro. And specifically, we of course are looking at financial statement data, so ratios, statistics. In the case of structured data, we're looking at the metadata, the tags, filing information, but we also look at things like market metrics coming from the secondary markets, volatility, changes in volume, activity in derivatives, short interest. We look at liquidity and other types of data around transactions. But in all cases, we're really focused on the types of actions or behaviors or things that are observable that might indicate some sort of a securities violation or something that might harm investors.
Could you help me understand just a little bit better the difference between your macro metrics versus micro metrics, just so I can have a clearer picture of what that means? Is that in the sense of economics, macro and micro, or how do you mean that?
Sure. So what I meant to say is that a team might be focused on a specific registrant or set of registrants and looking into a particular set of actions or events that where there may be a violation. So, for example, if it's a disclosure violation, and whether or not a company should have made a disclosure about a material event, it may have been surfaced in the news, but we're not seeing it reflected in an 8K filing or in periodic filing, something like that. So we'll look at the data to determine, first of all, whether if it's material, when it first came about, what other companies like it are doing in similar circumstances, and so forth. So I'll be very focused on a specific type of violation and a specific registrant or set of registrants. When it comes to being more proactive, meaning trying to expose or uncover possible violations that haven't been brought to us through, say, a whistleblower or a complainant or a referral from another regulator or SRO, then I'll look at a subset of registrants, some grouping of registrants. And when I say that, I don't just mean like a public company. It could be a security. It could be any anything that is in the jurisdiction for the SEC and would need to be registered with us. And I'll try to understand what constitutes normal behavior and the extent to which there's unusual things going on that might be a flag for a possible violation. So in the case of asset-backed securities, if the markups on those are well within, say, 2%, but all of a sudden I'm seeing markups for similar for transactions that go to 9 or 10%, I'll try to get a better sense of why that might be happening, if there's some possible explanation, and if I can't find one, I might then discuss it with an attorney in enforcement.
Excellent. So it's interesting how you use data, obviously, and you search that from within and without the company's own filings. But we live in a day of, I'll use this phrase, fake news. And so that's obviously an issue that you have to sort through as you see information. How does the quality of your data actually factor into your metrics?
So the advent of fake news is just one more thing that makes it increasingly difficult to do the analysis in just sort of a process-oriented way, just doing it over and over again by rote. You really need to look at the same things from a number of different directions to see whether or not the initial set of facts are really explaining the underlying behavior. But having said that, when it comes to data quality, it's incredibly important, but it is not the only thing that's important. Timeliness of the data. Sometimes with a commercial data source might have a very long time lag between when something is first published and when it finally gets to us. How granular the data is, whether or not it's accessible easily, how comparable is it over time and across filers, and whether or not it's searchable. I guess the bottom line is really if it's machine readable, and because of that, XBRL is really better than most other data sets that I'm aware of, because it's coming out with a filing, extremely granular, and it's dimensional. I can get the as filed data, and it's easy to integrate.
Excellent. How long has the Division of Enforcement actually used the XBRL formatted data in your analysis?
So, from my perspective, I'm sort of data agnostic. I just want to get the best data that I can get my hands on for a particular purpose. And so very often when it comes to financial data, that would be XBRL. XBRL has been in use with enforcement for since it's been filed with us. I think it's back in 2009, and it's sort of baked into a lot of the tools that we use, the underlying data sets. So, for example, there is something called a CIRA dashboard, which is just a dashboard of financial data about publicly traded companies. We have an internal tool, financial statement querier and query and viewer tool, which lets us look at XBRL data and in all of its dimensions and able to slice and dice it very easily. I know that the accounting quality model has been something that has been talked about in the press quite a lot, where we are evaluating accounting data for and sort of evaluating it for its quality and for the extent to which that we can see red flags about the registrant, using that combined with other data that we have generated, both public and non-public, and then in DIRA, the Office of Structured Disclosure, has a XBRL database that we tap. That's pretty much where I go for mine. So it's been in use for several years, and every year that goes by with more and more history, and with all registrants, all public companies filing in XBRL, it's much more usable, because we often have to do time series. We have to establish a pattern over time, and so the more history we have, the more useful it is. We also have data service providers for XBRL, which makes it more accessible to people who are not so technical. So for accountants and attorneys throughout the commission, they can just simply open up a Excel spreadsheet with a plugin and pull data from third-party source, and it's quick and easy.
That's interesting, Howard. So I'm curious, are any of those tools available to the public? Or are they just strictly internal use only?
So there are a lot of commercial tools. We use, I think, a couple of them, and those are certainly available to the public for a price. You can connect to the SEC website, to the XBRL. There's a structured data part of the website where a person could connect and pull data from the SEC itself in the way that I do internally. But I would really like to see more going on with respect to making the data more accessible and understandable. But that tends to be something that the private sector does, not something that the SEC would take upon itself.
Okay, so you've been talking about the XBRL and its use, and I'm sure there's other submissions that you look at, 8Ks and other form types besides the 10Qs or 10Ks, etc. What other data sources outside of submissions to the SEC does the division use?
So we are very aggressive about getting data, public data that's publicly available. So we make use of things like press releases, social media posts, news articles, earnings calls, filings with other regulators, because very often our registrants are regulated by other federal agencies who make their data public in the way that the SEC does. So we will look at, provided it's accessible to us and we're permitted to get that data set, we use it quite liberally. We also have quite a lot of non-public data, as you'd imagine. So there are filings that are non-public, such as Form PF. We have a lot of detailed transaction data from FINRA and from, say, the Municipal Securities Review Board. So we get transaction level data about trades that would probably not, that I don't think is public. We have suspicious activity reports, SARS, from FinCEN, OCIE, the part of the SEC that examines broker-dealers and investment advisors. They perform examinations, and that data is available to us when they make a referral to enforcement. In the course of an investigation, we'll subpoena data, and so we have information from there. So there's quite a lot that we have, and the challenge is often to integrate it and to make it meaningful, attaching it to the right registrant or to the right time frame and so forth. But those are the kinds of data sources and data sets that we make use of.
Howard, that's interesting. Is there a metric around the actual source as well? Is certain sources more reliable than others? Because obviously it drives to the quality of your data as the source, right? So do you have a metric around the data source itself?
So, I guess it all, the answer, I guess, is it all depends. Like Twitter really can't have a metric of reliability for that. We'll look at buzz on Twitter and map it to like the trading behavior and see whether or not it would appear that there's some sort of a market manipulation scheme, like a pump and dump, through social media. So we'll see, increasing levels of talk, and the sentiment seems to be fairly positive, and then the trading, happens sort of in sync with that, so that's one type of data source that we'll use where, reliability is not sort of foremost, at least in my mind. Whereas certainly any official source that we get, say from another federal regulator or from the registrant themselves, that level of data quality, we would expect it to be quite high, and when it isn't, that in and of itself may be a violation. But I guess I use these things in measured ways, so it really depends on the context, whether or not you would expect sort of a thinly traded company to have many analysts following it, and the kind of data set that you could really draw reliable conclusions from. Sort of each thing would need to be assessed on its own, and often in conjunction with other subject matter experts at the SEC who have a industry background, or they or a legal background.
Interesting. So would it be fair to say that you are somewhat source agnostic, as long as it's not an unreliable source? You use all data that you have access to in your analysis?
Well, the SEC is limited in what is permitted to access. We have our own internal rules about that. So certain social media sites, for example, or if it requires a login, there are many restrictions on what we can go after, and we're extremely we're in compliance. Certainly, I'm in compliance with any of the things we're not allowed to tap. But when it comes to other data sources, then very often the data is freely available, and we'll use it. But well before anything ever gets to the level of bringing an enforcement action, we are then going in a more manual and more detail-oriented way, looking at very specifically to the things that we think happen, or the things the data sources and so forth. Were those really? Did they happen? Did they happen in the way that we think, on the dates that we think, and so forth? So this really just leads us to a short list of what we should spend our time on. It almost never results in sort of an open and shut case, just based on the initial cut of what we find.
Excellent. Well, Howard, before we jump into our first CPE question, I'd like to just conclude this section with one last question, and that would be, do you have any feel for the new administration's sentiments about XBRL specifically?
I do not. Although I have no no insight whatsoever.
Very good. So, Michelle,
if anybody on the call does, I would be happy to have a conversation with that person after.
Let's learn together, huh? All right. Thank you, Michelle.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chris, and thanks, Howard. We're going to go to a couple of CPE questions now. And so we should be bringing those up on the screen here. Okay, so our first question, and again, for those of you getting CPE, make sure that you click on the button that you think is the appropriate choice. What is the role of the SEC Division of Enforcement? Is it to conduct investigations into possible violations of the federal securities laws, to ensure that investors are provided with material information in order to make informed investment decisions, or to regulate investment companies, variable insurance products, and federally registered investment advisors? So please post your response, and we'll give you a minute or so to do that. Okay, I think we're probably ready to go to the next question. If we could bring up the next poll question. What kinds of metrics does the Division of Enforcement use in its investigative process? On-site visits with public companies, sell-side reports from securities analysts, or monitoring a reported public company financial data? Okay, so again, just click on the button of choice, and then we'll close out this poll and go back to our conversation. Okay, great. We're going to close out in about 5 seconds here. Great, thank you. Okay, so Chris, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and if I don't have the correct slide up, please let me know as we go through this, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. So Howard, you know, when the mandate for XBRL filings occurred back in 2009, there was a 2-year limited liability period, which allowed the entire supply chain to learn about XBRL and how to do it, how to submit it. And there was a 2-year onboarding process, so that we started with facing financials and then we moved into the detailed footnotes. But now that the XBRL structured data is available, can you comment a bit on the quality of the data being produced in those XBRL filings?
Sure. So the data quality is certainly good enough for my purposes, and my opinion, it's pretty good. From what I can see, most registrants are in compliance, and the things that first glance seem to be making mistakes or unusual are often very reasonable and defensible, and that's the vast majority of the things that I come across. And the XBRL data, because it contains identifiers and makes it very easy to integrate it with other data sets. So I can take the CIK ticker, the header data, and so forth, and that makes it possible to then combine it with other data sets which have nothing to do with accounting data. So trading data or other sources. So having said that, I do encounter some data quality issues that do present problems and end up themselves becoming like things that contribute to whether or not a company or a registrant needs to be examined more closely. So for example, the use of extensions in XBRL filings for GAAP financial statement data. If the GAAP tags are available and not used, it just makes me wonder why would that be the case? Is the company genuinely different enough that a GAAP tag doesn't fairly represent what they're trying to disclose, or is the registrant trying to make its filing less comparable to other companies? Does it change its tags very often? This is it creates a bit of overhead for me because I need to then map it to a standard tag, and it often isn't really. I can't discern any reason for choosing an extension over a standard tag. Another issue that I come across is the flipped signs, positive and negative, which are almost always just they're just mistakes, and we correct for them. But again, if there's a material error in the XBRL filing, I sometimes wonder, so what kind of errors might be in the face financials or in the footnotes or in other filings. I don't know why a registrant would make an XBRL filing, which is a required filing, and not use every available resource, many of which are free, to first validate the data prior to submitting it to us. Again, it's just it just contributes to sort of an understanding of the quality of the registrant's filings with us. There are other issues like when billions are entered as millions or vice versa. This happens more in footnotes than it does in the financial statement itself. But those sort of pop out pretty readily, especially when comparing across industry peers, and we correct for them. Most often, it seems that they're just they're unintended mistakes. But I do find it more difficult than to baseline or benchmark or compare cross filers, and I would imagine that companies themselves, who I'm sure baseline against other companies, competitors, or whatever, would come across the same issue. Similarly for investors or analysts. If it's difficult for me to clean up the data once I've got it, I would imagine they'd have the same issues.
Interesting. So I'm curious if you have discovered or experienced that there's a difference of quality between the facing footnote and the facing financials, the balance sheet, the income statement, etc., and the footnotes. Is there red flags in the footnotes as an example versus what you see in the facing financials?
So I personally haven't done that particular analysis to see how they compare. I do know that most of the data that I find most informative for my purposes are in the footnotes, in the block tag footnotes, as well as the tables in there. That's very often where I'll look to see information about deferred liabilities or whatever's being discussed. That seems to be where the most informative data is, and as I said, I do find more often than I would have thought beforehand that there are validation errors in the sense that incorrect sign or scaling issues or the use of extensions that make it difficult to. It just adds a bit of overhead to my work, and I would imagine to other people's work who use the same data. But it's still usable.
Interesting. It's interesting that your focus is not necessarily on the facing financials because they're probably more standardized and more comparable, and the real data source is in the footnotes. So I'm curious, as you've had practice now using the structured data, has it provided any new insights that you've gained or able to use at the Division of Enforcement versus pre structured data or pre-XBRL?
Definitely. Having structured data, not just XBRL, but any type, is it's a great asset. The insight that I get is through integrating data sets that have some common thread across them, and it can be from the point of view of a registrant or of a particular financial metric, or it can be something entirely separate from that. And when I combine the various data sets, so maybe the XBRL data combined with maybe some qualitative analysis we might have done on say the MD&A, we're able to better understand what is happening in the markets and with the registrants that we regulate, and it helps to understand sort of what might be worth looking at more closely, because it could be indicative of a violation.
So the time you had mentioned earlier that timeliness of data is also kind of crucial here, and with the XBRL being machine readable, has that had any significant change in your analysis, having machine readable data available?
So absolutely. For the most part, any new tool or model that we develop that where we want to get financial data, I'll use XBRL data for that purpose. But combining it with qualitative data has proven to be a very useful technique. So, for example, if I look at financial ratios across a set of companies, or even for the same company over time, and I'll see substantial changes, say in liquidity, or in a ratio of like R&D expenses to the number of employees, or if I'll see that the market cap is fairly high, but it has no sales, all different methods of screening the various companies, and then I'll take that particular metric or ratio and use it as a proxy for perhaps having liquidity issues, or maybe there is some sort of maybe a company is trying to bury a certain kind of expense in another category, and I can take the ratio information and connect it with information that you can find in text. So it could be an 8K or a press release or analyst report, and if it doesn't match, or if there's an absence of a disclosure where I'm seeing liquidity crunch, for example, and I'm not seeing any mention of it by management, then that can be a pointer to an issue that the investigator might want to look at more closely. And this is something that we're doing regularly, and as I said before, like for the most part, companies are in compliance, and the things that I come across initially, they're don't go anywhere. But it does help us to focus on the subset of companies for which it's worth a more closer look.
Excellent. You had mentioned earlier the concept of metadata, and as you know, XBRL has metadata associated with every fact. And is that metadata, or can you give some examples perhaps of how you've used the metadata associated with the facts in those submissions in either an investigation or even an analysis?
Sure. So I guess I consider the metadata to be anything other than the values of the, that are inserted into that data element. And for my part, I think the XBRL metadata does a very good job of representing what those values are, and it's very rich. It's dimensional, and there are so many different ways you can then take that same data element and pivot it, look at it in different ways, and combine it with other data, with data from other registrants. It's extremely useful. When I was preparing for this, I had I don't really think about it so much as like XBRL metadata. I'm thinking more about like the properties of a filing and seeing, first of all, understanding what constitutes sort of normal or average behavior. Not that that's necessarily good or bad, just to understand what registrants are doing, what the distribution of those, the way that they use the, submit those filings, how that looks. Or do you all seem to be, very tightly grouped, or is it more spread out, more all over the place? And that helps me to then figure out what constitutes something that's unusual that might be worth looking at more closely. And these can be like indicators of other kinds of behavior that won't be found, say, in the XBRL filing, but I'll need to go somewhere else, and this helps me to understand which ones to focus on. And so from that point of view, the XBRL metadata is extremely informative, and it lets me put together peer groups in ad hoc ways that, for a particular purpose is really informative. So, like departing from the obvious things like SIC code or geography or, market cap, and looking at things that are more, grouping them by, say, the number of times they've changed auditor, or looking at the number of times they've amended their filings, frequently, companies that are frequently late, filing required things, and so forth. All of these things can become, they can inform the next step in trying to understand whether or not a registrant has violated something. And so from that point of view, the XBRL metadata is extremely useful.
Interesting. And Howard, you had mentioned earlier that you have seen where there's errors, I'll call them errors. I don't know that they are or aren't, but where a US GAAP tag might have been more appropriate than an extension, as an example. In your discovery process, and as you go through that, does the SEC provide any feedback to the registrant about those type of issues that you discover?
So that's largely something that the Division of Corporation Finance would handle. They do the filing reviews, and I think they have sent out comment letters about XBRL exhibits in the past. I don't think it's anywhere near the extent to which they might for the FACE financials and footnotes, but I think it's more on their radar than it has been before, which I think is a good thing. And but it's not something that enforcement would act on without a referral from CorpFin. And I think that is as it should be. Enforcement doesn't. We're not trying to find every sort of technical violation and go after a company. We're trying to understand if there's a pattern or a willful, if there's an intent to violate, and if it happens over time, and if it affects investors and so forth, that's when it really rises to the level of an enforcement action. And I think similarly with corporation finance, they're not trying to trip companies up. They're trying to help registrants be in compliance, and only if it's, that they're unresponsive or it happens over and over does it really rise to the level of something that they'll take action with.
So the Division of Enforcement doesn't necessarily reply back to registrants. Do you provide those type of findings or patterns to the within the SEC for those other groups to help, or is it? I'm just curious about the level of cooperation, I guess, that occurs there.
Oh, sure. So within DERA, the Division of Economic and Risk Assessment, that's where the XBRL team is located, and they do an enormous amount of work around evaluating the filings as they come in, and doing like basic, descriptive stats on them, profiling it. And I do believe that they've written and posted some of their findings on the SEC.gov website regarding things like the use of extensions and validation type errors that they're seeing. I know that they're accessible to filers when the companies need help with what to do and so forth. They provide a lot of guidance, but it's not an area that I personally work in. I do work with the team there when it comes to questions or ideas that I have with regards to using the XBRL data set, and so I think there's a lot of communication across, within the SEC, and that I think we're getting better at really exploiting this particular data asset, across offices and divisions.
Excellent. So, Howard, we talked earlier about data sources outside of their submissions, but within their submissions, is there any other submissions like within the NQs or the 10Ks, there's an MD&A section, or there's earnings releases, it's attached to an 8K. Do you wish any of those were added to the structured data requirement, or has there been discussions along those lines?
So the answer to the first question is yes, of course. The more structure that can be applied to these periodic filings, and even the filings that companies make when particular events happen, would be tremendously helpful. And I think it would be, least of all to the SEC, I think it would be extremely helpful for analysts and investors to be able to very quickly, zero in on the parts of the disclosure that matter most to that person. Discussions of risk, for example, and being able to easily pull those parts of the text together from different points in time or across registrants, would be that would be a tremendous help. And I think that for things like 8Ks, even beneficial ownership filings, broker-dealers have to file forms, ADV, these would benefit tremendously from being structured and tagged. It's not that we can't access it today, and we do, but it requires programming and scripting, and it's quite imperfect. But we're able to do it, and it would be done, I think, much better, much more efficiently if these were block tagged, or there was some detail tagging even around say discussions of risk. And I would think it would be I think a registrant would be in their interest too, because it'll be that much easier for them to present themselves to the public in a way that doesn't force somebody to wade through a whole lot of text.
Howard, As you speak, I think of many, many more questions, and we're not going to be able to address all the questions that are coming to my mind, let alone our audience today. But as we move into this final discussion about the benefits, if you will, of structured data within the Division of Enforcement, I'd like to, as you address this, start with this specific question, and that is, are there specific enforcements that have been brought or originated or can be traced back to actually a XBRL data set?
There are some things in progress now which are not public, but in the past there have been cases where by doing financial statement analysis across large numbers of companies, we're able to identify things like misclassification of expenses. Almost always they are expenses that were illegal, burying them in some legitimate expense category, and by looking at data, doing ratio analysis, looking at, there's a lot of published benchmarks around different kinds of financial data elements, and seeing, substantial, variations in those can then look more closely and begin to bring a case that then would expose a violation. These are extremely difficult to do. I don't want to give the impression that we have a factory generating enforcement cases by simple ratio analysis. More often than not, it's something that's brought to our attention, and then we take that case and try to find others like it. And that has been productive, but it still requires a great deal of manual, legwork. The XBRL data and the initial indicators of what to look at, that's extremely helpful, but it's really the first step in a pretty, long series of things that have to take place before we're in any position to begin a case. But it's a great asset for us, and it can very quickly help us figure out whether or not to proceed.
Excellent. So, in conclusion, there's just a couple thoughts. One is, we talked about different data sources beyond the SEC submissions, but still those quarterly reports, those periodic reports are still your primary data source. Is that fair?
For certain kinds of cases, they are. And in almost all cases that involve financial data, we will end up pulling that in at some point. But it's one of many.
Okay, and so, I would like to just close with this last question. What impediments, if any, that are in the way of actually using XBRL more widely, like in the MD&A or other filings as we spoke about?
Well, I guess the data as it is right now is good. I think that I would like to if I had to name just a couple things that I would like to see differently, I would like to see greater use of standard tags especially for gap data elements. I can't usually not really come up with any reasonable explanation why a company might not use them. Secondly is to block tag the text in those same filings. That would be a tremendous help. And finally, that we extend XBRL submission, the XBRL standard to other filings, and in particular ones that are not periodic, but that'll happen, based on events like the 8K. I think those things would go a long way towards making the data a lot more flexible and usable.
Excellent. Howard, it's been a pleasure having this conversation with you today and in our preparation time as well. It's nice to know you better. Michelle, with that, we can turn this back to you for a CPA question and wrap up.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much, Chris, and thanks very much, Howard. One other question that did come in, it was a question about the free validation tools that Howard mentioned in his talk. And I just wanted to mention that we have developed something called data quality rules, and those are available on our website. And I'll mention those again towards the end. But the data quality rules are basically a set of free validation rules that can check a filing to ensure that it has has certain errors removed from it, and provides information about those errors so they can be resolved. So before we go on to final steps, I wanted to go through our CPE questions. And so once again, we're going to bring CPE questions up on the screen here. So I'm going to ask my colleague to bring up our CPE, our third poll in the CPE questions.
Michelle, it should be on the screen at this point, and we are recording.
Okay, I do not see it for some reason. So maybe if you could just run through those.
Sure, the question is, using structured data has aided the division of enforcement by, and then the choices are making data easier to search, extract, and analyze, providing data previously unavailable from public companies, or providing more information on non-US companies. And if you're qualifying for CPE, please make your selection. And we'll move forward in just a couple of seconds. And then the last question for CPE this afternoon. XBRL formatted financial statement data from US public companies has been available since 2008, 2009, or 2010. Again, if you're qualifying for CPE, choose one of those three options. And we're going to close out here in just a couple of seconds. And Michelle, I'll turn it right back to you.
Great, thank you, David.
Yep, all set. Michelle,
great. Thank you. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and I just want to mention a couple of points here. We have another free webinar coming up on February 26th, or 22nd rather, which should be at 3 o'clock Eastern, and it's going to be on Create Better Financials, Use Data Quality Rules. And these are the rules that I was mentioning earlier, and you can review the latest published set of data quality rules by going to this URL, which we will be sending out in an email that comes to you tomorrow. And you can also find software that has been certified to work with the data quality rules by going to our certification page. So those are tools that have actually been tested to accurately and appropriately run all of these rules that can help you, help highlight any kind of errors that may be in your XBRL submission before you send it on to the SEC. So it's really part of our whole data quality initiative to help issuers create better quality XBRL financials. So again, I want to thank our speakers very much for joining us today. I think that was a great talk, really interesting. I learned a lot more about the enforcement division than I ever knew before. And thanks very much for coming, and we'll see you on future webinars.